could shift my voice and go like, "Oh, hello."
Oh my.
She's so
This is like a deep dive into Suji's
persona.
his inner conscience. He's actually just a schizophrenic having multiple conversations with himself.
I get to see my waifu at night when I don't have to take my pills. She gets upset every time I take the pills. She always just, and I don't see her for a good 8 hours, and she always tells me, "You're not going to really take those schizophrenic pills, are you?"
And then when I do, she disappears. Yeah.
Well, no, when I don't take them, she appears. She's just like, "Oh, thank God."
I'm back. Those silly pills keep me away from you. Welcome back to another installment of my how-to series, the last one being about Zanu, and that was quite some time ago, so I thank you all for your patience. To answer any potential questions, no, your eyes do not deceive you. That is indeed SujiTheMaiden alongside me in the same lobby.
Two. Then I guard broke him and just threw him off.
Very nice.
Not really.
For those of you who do not recognize that name, Suji here is the #1 Nuxia globally. That's insane. Really taking the "I'm a fill-in-the-blank main" statement to a whole new level of dedication. If the title of #1 doesn't make it obvious, Suji really knows his way around the character, and has quite the insight on unknown Nuxia techs for you big-brain advanced players. In today's video, I'll be teaming up with SujiTheMaiden to bring you the ultimate guide on how to play Nuxia, and hopefully get some laughs along the way. So you guys know that moment when you get Venge, but you die right before you get a chance to pop it? Is that called vegging?
Oh my god. You can't have the same thought process word for word. Did you do your 40 sets of vegging?
Also, one super fast thing before we start, I will be hosting a duel tournament on Saturday, May 25th. The winner will be receiving $25 from yours truly, as well as bragging rights for winning the first ever tournament hosted by me, TheDarkSide. If you want in, join my Discord server, link is in the description, and hit the tournament notified role in the channel settings to get updates about all upcoming tournaments. If you don't want to participate but still want to watch, you're in luck. I'll be live streaming the event on my Twitch channel, also in the description. It's going to be an absolute blast. You won't want to miss it. Now that everything's out of the way, let's get on to the actual content. Alrighty, first up we're going over the basics of Nuxia's kit and what sets her apart from the other heroes. We'll get into some more of the advanced stuff later, I promise, but for now, we're starting off slow. Nuxia is undoubtedly one of the most unique characters in For Honor, and has an argument for being the outright most unique. This can be seen right away with the special hooked swords she dual wields, which lead to a very unique mechanic we'll get to later. Nuxia also has some top tier fashion, and some of the most uniquely animated executions to boot. However, when looking at her base kit, she seems like one of the simplest heroes. Her main attacks are a 3-hit chain of any combination of lights or heavies. She also has a zone attack from neutral and in chain, but it is incredibly slow. She's got dodge lights from all directions, a unique animation for a parry counter, and finally, a deflect. As a neat little add-on, her finisher heavies actually displace and can wall splat opponents if they land. This has both a fun animation as well as practical use. But that's it. Outside of the special heavy finishers, she doesn't have any of the quote-unquote regular special properties. No hyper armor, no unblockables, no undodgeables, and no crushing counters or superior block. I mean, what? Forget special or unique, without any of those properties, how is Nuxia even viable in 2024? Well, just as looks can be deceiving, Nuxia's got a trick up her sleeve to employ those sick-looking twin hooks. Traps. Love them or hate them, there's nothing even remotely like them elsewhere in the game. 100% completely unique to Nuxia. Traps become even more unique in how they force both the Nuxia and her opponent to take the basic entry-level beginner habit of blocking and completely relearn it. I'm talking a total 180 degrees. Doesn't get much more unique than that. Normally, when you see an incoming attack, you match your guard to the correct side to block that attack. I know. Shocker. Nuxia's traps play completely counter to this. As a Nuxia, sometimes you want your opponent to block your attack. After throwing any heavy attack, you can choose to soft feint into a trapped heavy. For those newer players out there who might not understand what I mean here, there is a difference in feinting, referred to as hard feinting or soft feinting. Hard feints are when you throw a heavy attack and then hit the separate cancel attack button. You are now back into neutral stance and can continue attacking however you want, whether it's manually putting in another attack or just waiting around. However, a soft feint is much different and usually more specific. During a soft feint, you are changing from canceling one attack and directly flowing into a different attack without having to press the separate cancel attack button. This is oftentimes used by characters who soft feint their heavy attacks into guard breaks. They do this by simply pressing heavy attack and then immediately pressing the guard break button. Their hero will automatically cancel the heavy attack and continue on with the guard break. Accessing Nuxia's traps works the same way. After throwing a heavy attack, press the guard break button at the same time you would for any other soft feint. Nuxia will then create a trapped version of her heavy, and this is where Nuxia's uniqueness lies. If my opponent is matching guard with one of my trapped heavies, the Nuxia actually comes out on top. Using her hooked swords, she grabs the enemy's weapon, traps them, and deals a bit of damage. Although it's sometimes inconsistent, the traps also counter both parry and crushing counter attempts. This is the complete opposite way of defending against all other heroes in the game and makes for some crazy mind games and extremely satisfying combos to pull off. As a personal anecdote, this gets especially funny when your opponent allows you to just straight up smack them multiple times in a row when they try to call your bluff, thinking you're throwing a trap, but instead you're just simply throwing regular attacks.
Simply don't push all of them.
Oh! Okay, I just did the triple heavy chain and hit all 3 heavies on that guy.
I saw that. That was really easy.
Oh, and I'm not done yet. Remember that really slow zone attack from earlier? It's slow for a reason. You can turn that zone also into a trap, and it's slow so your opponent can have time to react and place their guard on the side you want. This zone attack adds another layer of complexity to Nuxia's trap game, because although this attack is slower and much more risky to use, if the trapped zone is successful, Nuxia full-on yeets her enemy to the ground and stabs them for a lot of damage. It also happens to be one of the coolest animations in the game.
I love that animation. That is kind of fun.
Also, don't underestimate the reach on that regular zone, as it covers an insane amount of space, and on top of that, clocks in at 28 damage. If you know when to use it, it's a great tool for punishing unsuspecting enemies and creating a lot of room to breathe. I find it hilarious that this small female character is whipping around these swords with such ferocity that everyone has to duck and cover or they'll be eating that zone attack with or without consent. I'm not gonna lie, it feels pretty gangster.
Point right as soon as he left.
Doing some
I know what it was, Ozzy, don't you dare.
Into the dodge. Oh, wow.
For lava, but whatever.
It's also fantastic for throwing off opponents who are expecting a faster attack. You can catch quite a few players off of parry attempts and snag them on early dodges, so honestly, the slow speed here is preferable. Now, with all these newfound revelations, don't get too carried away. Your opponents have a few ways of avoiding your trapped attacks. This includes simply putting their guard to a different side, leading to an awkward, confused stare. Dodging, or even emoting, also counter your traps. Again, you want your opponents blocking, parrying, or attempting a crushing counter in order for you to put them in a bind. For some fancy stuff I picked up on while playing with her, you can try and take a fun risk on guard break punishes. After a guard break, instead of throwing a guaranteed heavy, you can throw a trapped zone attack. The regular zone attack is too slow to be guaranteed after a guard break, and your opponent might assume you messed up your punish and try to block you. In that split second when their guard reappears, your little surprise will trap them, and I cannot explain this enough. The amount of raw adrenaline that surges through my brain when I hit this mind game is unlike any other.
Ooh, we got it.
Following up with some last-minute insight for you competitive Dominion players out there, like myself, unfortunately, you might want to look for someone else on your team roster.
Back to throwing.
Hunter, you're gone.
You're playing Nuxia. I'm allowed to throw.
Her caltrops, although recently nerfed, are still useful in teamfights, and one mechanic that's great for Nuxia is actually being on the external of a gank scenario. It's better for your enemies to focus on your teammates, because it makes your traps more of a 50-50 on your opponent. Your enemy will want to protect their flank as a natural reaction, and by abusing this gut instinct, it makes for easy traps.
Yep.
Otherwise, her normal hitboxes are mid at best, and without hyper armor or unblockables, you've got to stay on the outskirts of those teamfights, and this makes things quite difficult for her. I will say though, it is downright diabolical that her traps revenge lock, meaning enemies can't activate revenge when they are caught in them, and you can use this to confirm death blows by your teammates.
Gotcha, bitch!
Yes, dude! My trap just confirmed Arhito's tier 4. And he had revenge too, but it revenge locked him so he couldn't do anything. He was just sitting there trapped, watching the impending doom on its way.
By all means though, don't let this stop you from playing the character, because she's still insanely fun, and landing that trap mechanic just hits different.
Woohoo! Dude, hitting 2 traps in a row is so satisfying.
Moving on to Nuxia's feats, she has 4 unique abilities that I'd like to go over, and I think they suit her very well. Her tier 1 is a passive called Deadly Duet, which gives you a 20% damage bonus against opponents in a 1v1 situation. Nothing else really special here, but it is a noticeable damage increase. It's certainly fun to use, but against coordinated teams, you won't get much use out of it. I typically go back and forth between using this and Bounty Hunter as her tier 1 options. Her tier 2 is called Caltrops, or as we like to refer to them, Legos. These little buggers pack a punch, and quickly turn the tide of any team fight. Upon activation, Nuxia throws down a bunch of spiked metal balls covering a small area. Anytime an enemy moves, they take 2 damage, and that classic metallic clink sound effect chimes off. 2 damage doesn't seem like a lot until you realize that every single action counts as moving, including counter guard breaking an enemy's guard break attempt, performing executions, and even emoting. Even simply glancing in their general direction puts you at risk of being punctured. As you might guess, Nuxia is completely immune to the effects of the caltrops, but her teammates, not so lucky. Thankfully though, they only take 1 damage per movement, but it's enough to upset your teammates more than the actual enemy, and even cause accidental team kills.
Hey, guess what? Caltrops.
Oh, that's actually a great caltrop. That's hurting more than it's hurting them, though. I will be real with you.
Sorry, Sai.
I almost died because of you.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I haven't been in, like,
I think you do.
Nuxia also has Executioner's Respite and Thrilling Comeback as her tier 2 options, but if you're not running caltrops, you might be suffering as much brain damage as my buddy Torv and become a Cheems linguist.
Cheems cracker.
Cheems cracker? Shut! Shut your mouth. Don't ever come at me with that again. Cheems cracker? I can't do this anymore.
Her tier 3 is called Thread of Fate, which can actually pair really well with her other feats. You select an enemy, and they'll be bound to you, making them unable to run, sprint, or dodge roll away. The enemy is restricted to walking only, and the tether only becomes broken if they leave your lock-on range. The feat itself doesn't do much outright, but what it's for is setting up either yourself or your teammates to punish lone enemies who have strayed too far from their allies. Nuxia also has Slip Through, which gives you an attack buff on your next attack after dodging, and Takedown, which, upon activation, makes all her throw attempts put enemies on the ground. This includes your finisher heavy throws, so it certainly has its uses, but I usually opt for the other choices. Nuxia's tier 4 is called Infection, and is essentially Warmonger's tier 1 corruption attack. Nuxia selects an enemy, and that enemy becomes corrupted. Both the corrupted enemy and any additional enemies that step within the corruption ring both take damage, and will continue to take more tick damage the longer they stay close together. Nuxia also has Regenerate and Berserker as tier 4 options, but I usually find the most use from Berserker, which gives you a 45% damage reduction, which really helps her out in teamfights. Now, the moment all you hardcore Nuxia enthusiasts have been waiting for is finally here. As you might imagine, Suji has done a lot of experimenting with Nuxia, and has discovered multiple unique techs that he is willing to share with you all. This stuff is a bit more advanced for beginner players, but it's helpful information nonetheless. Take it away, Suji.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to properly introduce myself. I'm SujiTheMaiden, but most people call me Suji, and I'm the #1 Nuxia globally. I'd like to take this moment to thank and appreciate DarkSide for bringing me along on this project that we've discussed and worked on for weeks. But now I'm happy to say that we can finally bring you all up to speed on Nuxia and how she does in the current meta. Is she a good hero? She can be. Is she a fun hero? Most definitely. Nuxia has always had the underlying potential to becoming something great. With 100 MS change to her traps to where her traps activate at 300 milliseconds into her heavy, you are also setting your opponent up with a pin duration that lasts 800 milliseconds for a chunk of 22 damage. This specific tool in her kit is her most dependent tool to maintaining your offense as much as you can. But although Nuxia can thrive off of high damage, it can become very inconsistent. And see, if there's one thing that sets Nuxia apart from the rest of the roster, it's the high probability of your offense not working out the way you want it to. Is there something wrong with the trap since the change made it borderline unreactable? Well, yes, there is, unfortunately. Her traps mechanic is still fundamentally flawed. The true problem with traps weren't truly tackled, although I will say that making the traps unreactable did provide them more likeliness to connect on opponents. But there is also the biggest issue that traps have had since she was brought into the game: miss parry windows. She is a pretty decent duelist, although I will say that there are techs involved that very select few Nuxia mates and I have invented that give her more of an edge. I'll be the one to say that Nuxia is very high skill curve, not just because you always need to make the offensive read, but also regarding this tech that I will be showing all of you. I've kind of kept this information hidden for a while, and didn't mention the tech in a YouTube video, considering that ever since I posted my delay tech video, many players seem to have exploited it more than they have utilized it, which was such a shame. But my techs here are going to act as a 50-50 in a hard read, so good luck trying to exploit this. This particular tech is called the 50-50 parry. Nuxia has always had arguably the best repost in the game, given its 15 damage on heavy parries where you can continue your chain offense, but there is another punish to heavy parries that make traps borderline broken in this instance. The opponent has just enough frame to get back into their guard to be caught by a trap on a heavy parry. Although it is not confirmed, utilize this tech because it is probably the best way to condition your opponent. If your opponent is smart enough, they eventually will adapt and no longer fall for it. You will whiff the trap, don't be afraid of that. Now you must be thinking, okay, now I just have to go back to parry repost on heavy parries. Now that you've conditioned your opponent to no longer fall for traps on heavy parries, you've been given the green light to start introducing raw heavies on heavy parries. I know what y'all are thinking now. Can I utilize Nuxia's zone trap in a similar way? Damn right you can. Nuxia's zone trap applies to light parries, a guard break, and a wall splat. Do not frantically mash your buttons, because sometimes you will input Nuxia's repost on accident if you don't time it right. Now let's discuss the key reason why Nuxia has a high skill ceiling. It's not just because of offensive reads, tech, or frame advantage, or her traps still being fundamentally flawed. You need to learn recovery timing of the character you are facing. You'll deal with many characters with backstep lights, backstep heavies, charge bashes, or just all around unintentionally or intentionally whiffing whatever attack they throw at you. You need to time your traps perfectly to make them properly act as traps should. There is another tech I've discovered though. I call it the glide flicker tech. Nuxia has actually an animation change while also a flicker tech, but it's nothing really special really given there's only one other input after using it, which is her dodge forward light. How you would do this is that you would need to backwards, unlock, emote, lock, and forward dodge. It does take a little practice, but if you want to be stylish, this is how you do it. Also, I guess we can reanalyze her delay inputs. I do have more info on how you can utilize them to make Nuxia more fun and dangerous. As some of you may know, everything in her kit has a delayable input window. You can't delay her lights or heavies from neutral, obviously, but you also cannot delay her chain lights or heavies on trap whiffs. Also, speaking of chain heavies, use her heavy chains on trap whiffs. It punishes early dodges while also giving you a wallop 27 damage. In my opinion, it is way more effective than a tiny 9 damage light chain. Also, here's some more delay tech I will provide you. Her repost already has the opportunity to ledge, but let's say your opponent is not as close to the edge as you'd like them to be, while you've gotten a heavy parry hit stun off of them. You can actually delay your repost to a pretty decent frame to even further the distance for a more likely ledge opportunity. Alright, next up we're going to talk about Nuxia's GB counter. So Nuxia had a buff a little over a year ago that made her zone attack become something so much more. The buff provided only 100 MS GB vulnerability. To make it simple, her zone is completely non-guard breakable. Now, what exactly can you use that towards? GB punishes, of course. You basically can make a hard raid when your opponent feints to GB. Unblockables are an obvious curb stomper. As we all know, unblockables are feinted to GB more often than not, so utilize Nuxia's Raw Zone this way. You will create a distance from your opponent while giving them a knocking 28 damage punish. And before we close this video out, I'd like to give TheDarkSide a huge thank you for involving me in this video. I honestly hope these Nuxia tips and techs help out many of you that are struggling introducing yourself to Nuxia. I know Nuxia can be complex at first and confusing, but that's the charm that high skill curve heroes have. When you walk into uncharted territory, embrace it, but also be patient with yourself. Toodles, everyone.
Before we end today's video, I want to give a massive shout out to SujiTheMaiden for all the help and support for today's video. I will be linking his channel in the description, and I highly suggest you check him out if you haven't already. I would like to thank you all for watching till the end of today's video. Don't forget to follow me over on Twitch and TikTok, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and join my Discord for all kinds of updates regarding the channel. As always, take care, and don't forget to join the dark side.